What would you do if your seatmate spent the entire flight belittling you? This man stayed silent, reading calmly as the woman in the golden gown mocked his profession, his clothes, and his life. She was certain she was the most important person on the plane, but she had no idea who she was actually talking to. This is the story of the quietest power move I've ever witnessed. Beside him, the woman shifted with growing irritation. She had auburn hair curled perfectly into place and a designer handbag occupying half the shared armrest. Her perfume, sharp and floral, filled the confined space. She sighed audibly every few minutes as though each breath were a personal protest against the indignity of air travel. When the flight attendant passed by offering water, she lifted her hand dismissively. "No, thank you, though maybe clean the tray tables once in a while," she said loud enough for several rows to hear. The protagonist looked up briefly, offering a polite nod, but said nothing. He turned back to his tablet, his stylus gliding silently across the screen. Then turbulence hit, light, but enough to rattle the glasses and make passengers grip their armrests. A splash of champagne escaped from the woman's cup, landing on her dress. Her gasp sliced through the calm murmur of the cabin. "For heaven's sake," she snapped, turning sharply toward him. "Could you not bump the seat every 5 seconds?" He blinked, surprised. "I didn't touch it." She frowned, scanning him up and down as though assessing an intruder. "Of course you did. These seats don't move themselves." He simply offered a napkin from his pocket. "Here, this might help." Her lips curled into a half smile that wasn't a smile at all. "Oh, please keep your pity. I can handle a spill." She took another tissue from her bag and began dabbing at her gown with delicate, irritated motions. The plane steadied. The protagonist turned back to his tablet, hoping silence would return. But silence never lasts long when pride is wounded. "You know," she said after a moment, voice cutting through the steady hum, "you really should watch where you put your things. Do you mind? Some of us paid for our personal space. It's a concept, I know, but try to grasp it." He looked up again. "People like me." She leaned back, crossing her arms. "You know what I mean. People who think they belong anywhere they sit. No offense, but it's obvious you're not used to flying much." He studied her face for a beat. None taken. She seemed disappointed by his lack of reaction. "So, what do you do?" "Something creative." Her tone dripped with sarcasm. "I teach," he replied simply. Her eyebrows arched and the corners of her lips lifted in condescension. "A teacher. How modest. I suppose someone has to prepare the next generation for the jobs my husband actually creates." A passenger across the aisle glanced over, sensing the tension. The protagonist noticed, too, but stayed calm, folding his tablet cover neatly. "I find the work rewarding enough." She scoffed. "Sure, rewarding. Meanwhile, real professionals are up there sipping wine behind the curtain. Guess we all make our choices." He offered no response this time. He could feel the weight of her words, but not because they hurt, because they revealed so much. There was something brittle about her tone, the sharpness of someone who needed to feel superior just to feel stable. Minutes passed. The attendants wheeled carts down the aisle, and the faint smell of reheated pasta filled the air. When the cart reached their row, the attendants smiled politely. "Chicken or pasta, sir?" "Pasta, please." "And for you, ma'am?" Emma, though he didn't yet know her name, barely glanced up. "I'll have the chicken, and please make sure it's actually warm this time." The attendant's smile faltered slightly, but remained professional. "Of course." When she left, the woman exhaled sharply and muttered, "Service these days. Unbelievable." The protagonist looked out the window. Beneath them, clouds stretched endlessly, a glowing white sea under the sun. It was peaceful except for the voice beside him that refused to quiet. "You said you teach," she continued. "What subject?" "Art. Drama." He turned slightly toward her. "Science." She tilted her head unimpressed. "Science, huh? And that's what high school. University? Really?" Her laugh was soft and disbelieving. "No offense, but you don't look like a professor." "What do professors look like?" "You know, tweed jackets, glasses, that sort of thing." "Not whatever this is." She gestured vaguely at his black t-shirt and jeans. I mean, you look like you fix computers at a mall. He smiled faintly. Maybe I should try that next. She misread the humor as agreement. Well, at least you're honest. Most people try to pretend they're more than they are. I respect that. The irony merely made him laugh. Instead, he nodded and went back to reading. The words on his tablet blurred slightly as he caught his reflection in the glass. Calm eyes, steady breath. The practiced patience of someone who had faced far worse insults in quieter rooms. For a while, there was only the low thrum of the engines and the faint rattle of trays. But then came the voice again, restless and sharp. You know what? I can't stand, she said to no one in particular. People who think education makes them better than others. You can't teach common sense. He didn't answer. She continued, emboldened by his silence. My husband runs a company. He hires people like you all the time. Smart on paper, useless in reality. He turned to her slowly, not angry, just weary. That's an interesting perspective. Oh, it's not perspective, she said. It's experience. You'd be amazed how many educated people can't even hold a conversation without sounding like a textbook. A ripple of discomfort passed through nearby seats. Someone coughed deliberately. She noticed, but pressed on as though feeding on the attention. No offense, of course. I'm sure you're very good at whatever you teach. The protagonist stared at her for a long moment, then spoke softly. You might be surprised who my students are. Her eyebrows drew together, curious but defensive. Oh, why are they famous or something? He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned back, closed his tablet, and rested his hands calmly in his lap. The hum of the engine filled the pause between them. Outside, the sky began to dim into a dusky violet as the plane continued its journey. The golden sheen of her gown caught the last slant of light, reflecting it in fractured glimmers across the sea back. For the first time, she looked uncertain, perhaps wondering if she had said too much. The seatbelt sign pinged softly. A gentle voice from the cockpit announced mild turbulence ahead. Emma gripped the armrest instantly, knuckles widening. The protagonist glanced sideways, watching her fear tighten her expression. It's just a change in air pressure, he said evenly. Perfectly normal. She didn't reply, eyes fixed on the seat in front of her. The engines roared slightly louder as the plane adjusted altitude. Then, as quickly as it came, the turbulence eased. When she finally exhaled, her voice was smaller. I hate flying. He said nothing, just turned back to the window. The faint reflection of her anxious face hovered beside his own calm one. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was thick with something unspoken. She didn't apologize, and he didn't expect her to. But somewhere in that quiet, the balance between them shifted. The cabin lights dimmed further. Passengers began settling into uneasy rest, but the air between seats 17A and 17B remained electric, charged with a residue of pride and restraint. He closed his eyes, not in sleep, but in quiet preparation. Something told him this conversation wasn't over yet. The turbulence had passed, but the tension between them hadn't. The cabin air felt heavier now, thick with unspoken challenge. Emma sat with her arms crossed tightly, her jaw set in the kind of defiance that only arrogance could build. The protagonist, still calm, sipped water from the paper cup the attendant had left him. He had no desire for another conversation, but some people couldn't bear silence, especially when it felt like defeat. So, Professor, she said suddenly. Her tone sharpened with mockery. Since you're such an expert on air pressure, maybe you can explain why we keep shaking every 10 minutes. Is the pilot learning on the job? He didn't look up from his tablet. It's a fascinating phenomenon, actually. The plane is navigating layers of air moving at different speeds. A perfect metaphor for this conversation, don't you think? That silenced her for a second, but only briefly. Oh, come on. Don't tell me you're one of those people who think knowledge fixes everything. Sometimes experience matters more than education. He nodded slightly. Sometimes it does, though ideally one informs the other. She huffed, looking away. The light from the overhead panel glinted against her earrings. Her irritation seemed to grow with every word he didn't say. She was used to arguments, not composure. To confrontation, not control. The plane dipped gently again. A ripple of nervous laughter passed through the rows. Emma grabbed the armrest, eyes wide, but this time she said nothing. Her silence was louder than her words. Moments later, the flight attendant approached with a polite smile. Sir, I just want to say, I think I've seen one of your lectures online. Are you the professor who spoke about behavioral responses under pressure? Emma's head turned sharply. The protagonist's eyes flickered with faint amusement. That sounds like me, he said. Oh, wow. The attendant said, almost breathless. I watched that in college. You talked about emotional intelligence during crisis management. It stuck with me. He smiled warmly. I'm glad it helped. The attendant nodded respectfully. You changed the way I handle stress. I can't believe I'm serving you coffee right now. She laughed softly, embarrassed. It's just a plane ride, he said gently. The attendant left, and her words seemed to freeze the very air between them. The hum of the engines was the only sound. Emma's champagne flute, previously held with such arrogance, now hovered uncertainly halfway to her lips. The sneer had vanished, replaced by a slow dawning, dreadful curiosity. The murmurs began. Passengers nearby whispered to each other, subtle at first. One man, too, rose up, glanced at his phone, then at the protagonist with dawning recognition. Emma noticed. You give lectures? She asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Occasionally, he said, mostly research and teaching these days. Who are you exactly? He didn't answer immediately. The silence pressed against her until she spoke again, the edge in her voice replaced by something more brittle. You said you're a professor. Of what exactly? Aerodynamics and behavioral psychology. Her mouth opened slightly. That's oddly specific. He met her gaze. They overlap more than you'd think. Her confusion deepened. How? He leaned back, eyes steady. Both deal with pressure. The way people react to turbulence, whether in the air or in conversation. The words hung there uncomfortably precise. She looked away first. Her earlier smugness had cracked, replaced by something smaller, less certain. The young woman across the aisle, who had been scrolling on her phone, suddenly whispered to her friend, That's him. I knew it. He's that professor who gave the viral talk on cognitive bias. The friend whispered back, Seriously? The one with millions of views. Emma's shoulders stiffened. She adjusted her gown and straightened her posture as if trying to regain authority through posture alone. The protagonist said nothing. He wasn't interested in recognition. But the shift in the cabin was unmistakable. People who had ignored him before were now looking at him with quiet respect. Emma cleared her throat. Well, she said, forcing a small laugh. I suppose that's impressive. He inclined his head slightly. Thank you. I just didn't expect someone like you to be so accomplished. He raised an eyebrow. Someone like me? She hesitated, fumbling. I just mean you're very casual. Most professors I've met are different. Different how? Formal, polished. You seem ordinary. He smiled faintly. That's the thing about assumptions. They usually tell you more about the person making them. Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time since takeoff, she had no clever retort. The flight attendant returned carrying another cup. Professor, the captain wanted to say he's a fan of your work, too. He said he's used some of your studies in pilot training programs. Emma froze mid-motion, her hand hovering near her bag. The protagonist accepted the drink with quiet gratitude. That's kind of him, he said. Tell him I appreciate it. The attendant smiled. Will do. The sound of hushed conversation rippled through the rows. Emma's cheeks flushed, her posture softened, her confidence visibly eroding. She reached for her glass of water, but her hand trembled slightly. So, you're well known, she said after a moment. Not really, he replied. Just in certain circles. She nodded quickly. Too quickly, right? I mean, everyone has their thing. I'm sure you're great at yours. He turned to her, his tone calm, but edged with quiet meaning. You don't have to downplay it. It's okay to admit when you misjudge someone. She bristled. I didn't misjudge you. I just didn't know who you were. There's a difference, he said. One is ignorance, the other is arrogance. Her mouth opened, then closed again. The color in her face deepened, and for the first time, her voice faltered. I suppose I might have been a bit blunt earlier. A bit, he echoed with the faintest trace of humor. The cabin grew still again. The protagonist returned to his tablet, scrolling calmly, while Emma stared at the seat back in front of her, lost somewhere between anger and embarrassment. Outside, clouds drifted beneath them, illuminated by the fading light. The plane began its descent through a stretch of thin mist. Emma shifted in her seat, restless, uncomfortable with a silence that no longer favored her. After a long pause, she spoke again, softer this time. You must deal with a lot of people like me. He didn't look up. Not as often as you'd think. Most people are more curious than cruel. She nodded faintly. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I know, he said. You were trying to feel important. A chime sounded overhead. The captain's voice came through calm and clear. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be encountering a bit of turbulence again as we approach the jetrine. Please remain seated with your seat belts fastened. Emma gripped the armrest instinctively. The plane shuddered and the overhead compartments rattled softly. She exhaled through clenched teeth, her fear visible now. The protagonist spoke quietly, his tone even. Steady breathing helps. Try counting to 4. She followed his advice reluctantly at first, then more deliberately. Her shoulders eased. The turbulence faded when the seatbelt sign chimed off again. She glanced sideways at him, a flicker of gratitude hiding behind her pride. Thank you, she said. We all have our moments of turbulence. What matters is how we land. For a while, they sat in silence again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It was layered with realization, discomfort, and something resembling humility. Then, as if fate wanted to underline the shift, the attendant returned with a quiet smile. Professor, the captain says he'd like to meet you after we land, if you don't mind. He's a big fan. Emma turned her face toward the window, but her reflection betrayed her expression. Shock, disbelief, and the faintest trace of regret. The protagonist nodded politely. Of course, the attendant left, and Emma stared straight ahead, silent. The plane leveled out again, smooth and steady. The hum of the engines filled the space between them, but now it sounded almost like a drum roll, steady, anticipatory, waiting for the moment when quiet revelation would turn to consequence. The captain's voice faded into static as the announcement ended, but the echo of it seemed to linger between them. The hum of the engines felt louder now, the rhythm of it pulsing like a heartbeat through the cabin. The passengers had settled back into quiet chatter, but every so often someone would glance toward the man in seat 17B. Recognition had spread like wildfire, subtle but undeniable. Emma sat rigidly, pretending to scroll through her phone, though her eyes flicked toward him with anxious regularity. The confidence she had flaunted earlier had withered into something brittle, almost defensive. He was aware of it, though he made no effort to gloat. His focus remained on his notes, on the half-finished manuscript opened before him. Yet his stillness carried weight now. The same composure that once made him invisible now made him the center of gravity in that narrow aisle. The space between them had shifted entirely. When the flight attendant returned to collect trays, she stopped by their row with a wide, genuine smile. Professor, the captain said your paper on flight psychology helped train his new team last year. He wanted to thank you personally once we land. Several passengers nearby looked up with interest. A man of few rows back murmured, I've read that study. The words were quiet, but loud enough for Emma to hear. She froze, her hand halfway to her purse. The protagonist inclined his head politely. That's kind of him, he said, his tone steady. The attendant beamed. He also mentioned your book. I ordered it after watching your interview. You made complex ideas so human. He smiled softly. That's always the goal. The attendant collected their trays and moved on, but the moment left a ripple in its wake. Emma adjusted her seat belt, her eyes fixed on the seat ahead. A faint tremor in her hands betrayed her composure. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, unable to find words that didn't sound hollow. Finally, she managed. You must think I'm awful. He didn't look at her immediately. I think you're human, he said. That's generous, she muttered. Not really. Most cruelty starts with misunderstanding. She laughed under her breath, a humorless sound. You sound like one of those self-help podcasts. Maybe, he said, but there's truth in it. The engines roared softly as the plane began to descend through thickening clouds. The seat belt sign pinged again. Passengers straightened up, the cabin filling with a quiet rustle of preparation. Through the window, streaks of gray blurred into patches of distant city light. Emma's voice broke through the hum. You know, I wasn't trying to be cruel. She stopped, her throat tightening. I've spent my whole life around people who make me feel small. I guess I learned to strike first. He turned to her now, his gaze calm but piercing. Then maybe you spent your life fighting the wrong opponents. She swallowed, her lips parting as if to respond, but the intercom interrupted. Flight attendants, please prepare for landing. The conversation died in the noise of mechanical worries and hydraulic shifts. Emma's eyes flicked toward the aisle where passengers were craning to see the man they now whispered about. He felt the attention, but he didn't bask in it. He knew fame was just another kind of turbulence, unsteady, temporary. As the plane dipped lower, Emma leaned forward suddenly. Her voice hushed. You're not going to tell anyone about what I said earlier, are you? He looked almost amused. Why would I? Well, people were listening. Someone probably filmed it. I don't want to look like an idiot. He paused before answering. Emma, he said quietly, using her name for the first time. Her eyes widened slightly. The only person who decides whether you look foolish is you. What you do next matters more than what you said before. Her throat tightened again. I thank you. He nodded, then turned back toward the window. The city below shimmered like a web of gold and silver veins, sprawling beneath the dark. The wheels lowered with a muted thud. The runway lights aligned in perfect rows, guiding them towards solid ground. As the plane touched down, applause erupted briefly. A spontaneous gesture from tired travelers relieved to have landed safely. Emma clapped once hesitantly, her palms barely touching. The protagonist remained still, a faint smile playing at his lips. When the seatbelt light dimmed, passengers began standing, stretching, reaching for overhead bags. The protagonist waited patiently, hands folded, while Emma fumbled with her carry-on. Her voice came out softer than before. You really don't seem angry. I'm not, he said. Anger requires expectation. I didn't expect kindness from you. That's not an insult. It's observation. She blinked, struggling to process his calm. You make it sound like I'm a case study. He tilted his head. Everyone is in their own way. A short laugh escaped her. Small, genuine, almost apologetic. You really are, Professor. I really am. As the line of passengers began moving forward, the flight attendant approached again, holding something in her hand. Professor, she said, the captain asked me to pass this along. He said he's honored to have had you on board. She handed him a small envelope embossed with the airline's logo. Inside was a handwritten note. Your work inspires our crew every day. Thank you for reminding us that knowledge and humility keep us in the sky. Emma saw the note as he folded it carefully. The words hit harder than any reprimand could have. She looked down at her lap, her voice barely audible. I really was awful, wasn't I? He glanced at her. You were mistaken. There's a difference. The aisle began to move, passengers filtering out toward the open door. The cool rush of air from outside spilled into the cabin, carrying the scent of jet fuel and damp tarmac. Emma stood awkwardly beside him as they waited to exit. I hope you don't think I'm beyond saving, she said quietly. He smiled, not unkindly. No one is, but understanding only matters if it changes something. She nodded slowly, absorbing his words. The people ahead of them stepped out into the terminal, laughter and chatter blending into the low hum of the airport beyond. When it was their turn, the flight attendant by the exit greeted him with a respectful nod. It was an honor, Professor. Likewise, he said, stepping forward. Emma lingered a moment longer, watching the interaction. The contrast between how others regarded him and how she had treated him gnawed at her conscience. When she finally followed him out, she caught up just before the jet bridge opened into the terminal. Hey, she said, her voice trembling slightly. For what it's worth, I'll try to be better. He looked at her, his expression unreadable but gentle. Then, maybe the flight wasn't wasted. Before she could respond, the captain appeared at the entrance of the bridge, smiling broadly. Professor, I just wanted to thank you in person. Your research helped my trainees handle emergency simulations with confidence. Emma took a small step back into the shadow of the jet bridge, the same woman who had demanded the entire row's attention now trying to make herself invisible. She watched as the captain, a figure of ultimate authority in this world she looked down upon, shook the professor's hand with genuine reverence. The murmurs from the passing passengers, which she had dismissed earlier, now felt like a spotlight on her own humiliation. The captain extended his hand, which the protagonist shook warmly. Glad to hear it helped, he said. The passengers passing by began murmuring again. Someone whispered, That's him, the professor they mentioned earlier. Phones suddenly tilted upward, cameras flashing discreetly. Emma took a small step back, shielding her face, her cheeks burning. The captain clapped the protagonist on the shoulder. It's an honor, sir. When the captain turned to speak to the crew, Emma looked at the protagonist one last time. Guess you really do teach people how to stay calm under pressure. He met her gaze evenly. Pressure doesn't build character, he said, gathering his bag. It reveals it. And what's revealed can always be refined. Her lips parted, but no words came out. He gave a polite nod and walked toward the terminal, disappearing into the stream of passengers.